With the rise of the crossover, the fall of the sedan, and the hopes of an ever younger buying audience, if you're not on top of your game, it'd be pretty easy to get left behind. And in the last few years, we've seen a concerted effort from Acura with the introduction and reintroduction of a few models, all which happen to be crossovers, to really make sure that they are not left in the past. This is the latest of those. This is the 2025 Acura ADX, and while it's not exactly the crossover version of an Integra, it does fill a niche that Acura currently doesn't have any offerings for, and there isn't a whole lot of direct competition. While unfortunately I won't say this is the perfect match for the automotive enthusiast, the good news is there's a whole lot of other car shoppers that this is going to be a great fit for, and let me tell you exactly why. This probably isn't the largest implementation of that shield grille design, but based on proportions and overall percentage, it's got to be up there. And most of that has to do with the fact that this is a much smaller, I guess, less upright front end than we find on the other crossovers, the RDX and the MDX, although it is using the MDX design for that grille. It's going to flow pretty seamlessly into these daytime running lights, which are going to be standard LED as well as your LED headlights. We are driving the A-Spec though today, or the A-Spec Advance. Either way, the A-Spec and A-Spec Advance are going to get a sportier appearance package, a lot of that happening down here in that lower lip. And in this case, it's also going to add fog lights, but the lower lip outer portions here are going to be a gloss black, and in here, sort of a darker gray metallic look that I almost wish was what we carried through the rest of the way, but I guess gloss black is what we're going with this time. There's not a whole lot else happening up front. We do have a radar that's going to be located up back in here because this does have adaptive cruise control. And as far as other sensors, well, they're positioned a little bit strangely. We do have your parking sensors out here, but those are going to be painted to match the body color. And instead of them coming along the lower portion of the grille, you're actually going to find them up here blocking off one of those spots in the grille above, obviously painted black, so it shouldn't be too noticeable, but just a little bit strange. And as you can see over there, our daytime running lights also going to play our turn signal, just depending on what you need it to do. Honda and Acura may not love me bringing this up, but knowing this is based largely on the HR-V, I'm a little bit surprised at how much larger it is. It's about 5 inches more, and obviously you can guess where that comes from. Mostly going to be leaning towards styling because a lot of the underpinnings are very similar, but it puts it really, really close to the next level up in the Acura lineup, the RDX. So the question is, why this instead of that? Because you're losing a lot of kind of space on this one because it's a much more style-forward vehicle. But I don't think everyone needs as much space as maybe they think they do. And I think this is for folks who are coming from a car who just want to maybe sit a little bit more upright, want a little bit more cargo volume, and this is going to provide that. Where I might go ahead and shave off a few inches would be in the front and the rear. And this hood is one that I'm a little bit conflicted about because the engine only takes up about this much space here, and everything else is, I'm guessing, crash structure. But the good news is that at least from the front end, it is a very attractive vehicle. But this isn't a heavy-duty utility vehicle in any capacity. We do have all-wheel drive. We do have some ground clearance, but not an exceptional amount, enough that you don't have to worry if you end up off the beaten path a bit, but you're not taking this specifically off-roading. Although Acura does sell a number of accessories, a lot of them to be put on the roof, so this is sort of a lifestyle active vehicle. If you're a young professional or trying to scale down, but you still want to take your mountain bikes or your kayak or your paddleboard somewhere, you can do it here. It's not quite a forester outback vibe, but still you get a lot of practicality of it. Where you lose a little bit though is going to be here in the back. Because it does have this sweeping back end, it's a pretty steep rake and it's a bit of an unusual one. From where you're standing right now, it probably looks okay, at least to my eye. My favorite's probably a few degrees out, and that way it just feels like a flowing shape. But when you get back here, everything is, well, it's a little bit slab-sided, and I hate to say that about a vehicle ever, especially something that's designed to be an attractive, stylish car, but yeah, this back end shape is just not my favorite. Let me know if you've ever had a car purchase put on hold because of one way it looks at one different angle. It's not something that would make me stop buying this vehicle, but I wouldn't mind if it came out a little bit further and then dropped a little bit sharper. This isn't a supersized crossover, but that's also one of the things that makes it as fun to drive as it ends up being. But a lot of what makes it as enjoyable on the road or on a certain back road is going to be the wheel and tire combination. Now, because we have the A-Spec, we're going to have the bigger wheels and the wider tires. That means a 235/45 R19, and that's a 19-inch wheel paired, again, specifically with that A-Spec. What comes standard on the ADX is going to be an 18-inch wheel with a 225 width tire. So you're losing some width, but not an enormous amount. Obviously, though, you're going to get a 55 series tire instead of this 45. But when I say the A-Spec is sort of the sportier model, it doesn't mean it gets a whole lot of performance upgrades. That wider tire is going to be mostly it, because there's no changes to the suspension. There's also no changes to the brakes or that power output. Around back, the LED light treatment continues, as does the slightly exaggerated light design, but you'll notice those turn signals over there are on the more subtle side and amber for those who have a preference. Even though we have a fairly steeply raked rear window, we do still have a rear wiper, so that's great for those who live in areas like I do. As you can see, it's been raining on and off all week, and I found just enough time to catch a break to do some filming. Just above this rear window, we do have a spoiler that, depending on the angle, looks very subtle or a little bit more aggressive. It does have sort of a bat ear design that pokes out here towards the middle, and then the rest of the rear end is actually pretty subtle. The loudest portion of it is going to be baked into the lowest portion. That's going to be still the A-spec design, so we get a more sporty rear end, and actually that black plastic does cut off in a way that I wish we had more of it up front. So we go from gloss black to sort of that metallic gray finish, and I just wish we had a little bit more of this, especially with this color. I think it'd do a good job of complementing one another. The dual-tipped exhaust is a nice aesthetic touch, although I won't say it's the hardest working component in this vehicle. It's not an engine you're going to do a whole lot of revving just to enjoy that exhaust note, and where a lot of vehicles are just tucking that exhaust away, especially if it's not a featured component in the vehicle, this actually might be one that could get away with it. But let me know what you think. If we want dual exhaust, one exhaust, or no exhaust, I'm a little bit torn, but I appreciate symmetry more than anything else. Because we have the top end model, we also have parking sensors here throughout the rear. In this case, they're all just gonna be painted black to match, not black or gray. And our badging stays pretty minimal. We've got Acura here in the center, ADX, all-wheel drive, and then over there, A-spec, just so that everyone knows this is the sporty one. If you're looking for a performance Acura, this probably isn't the hood you're looking under. That's going to be the Integra Type S or the NDX Type S. Notice a pattern there, and no Type S treatment planned for the ADX, at least that I know of. Though one upgrade I wouldn't mind is having a sturdier push rod or maybe some hydraulics, because that's the heaviest hood to rod ratio I've experienced in just a little while. Now, what we do find under the hood is going to be a 4-cylinder, 2-liter turbocharged engine paired with a CVT, putting out 190 horsepower and 155 pound-feet of torque. While those numbers probably aren't going to blow you away, they're not what we find in the HRV. Luckily, we do get an upgrade from there. It's actually going to be the same output as we find in the CRV, but it does fall just a little bit short of the Integra, as well as something like the RDX. We've got the all-wheel drive configuration here, so that's ready for 25 city, 30 highway, and 27 overall combined. If you want to go for front-wheel drive, which you certainly can, that will net you 1 more mile per gallon overall. That's city, highway, and overall combined. But since we have the all-wheel drive, I'd say that's probably the direction I would go. Get you a little bit better traction in some adverse weather conditions, and probably a little bit better bump off the line, though primarily this drives as a front-wheel drive vehicle. That CVT may not be everyone's favorite, but it's going to do a couple things. Get the most out of that engine and get us the most miles per gallon. And again, since I don't see this as geared towards a performance-oriented audience, that CVT is not one that bothers me. I do have some other powertrain suggestions, but I'll save those to the end of the video. In terms of front seat comfort, this is almost immediately a 10 out of 10, especially considering the price point. This seat just works for me, and a lot of it has to do with the seating position, because even though this is a crossover, this is one of the most car-like seating positions I've been in a while, where your legs are way out in front of you instead of down beneath you. And that's something you get in the RDX. Here, much more of an Integra-like seating position. Now on the top end trim, we have 12-way adjustable seating. On the passenger side, 4-way powered, so not nearly as much, and we also get 4-way lumbar support, and the seats themselves are pretty well bolstered. It's much more of a sport seat than I would expect for some of the performance that we get out of the vehicle, but since I love a good seating position, this is fantastic, especially for the dollar. The one thing we're missing, which kind of is a for the dollar thing, is that the steering wheel is a manual adjustment, which I'm not particularly picky about on my own. The issue here is that we have 2-way position memory, which means that when you adjust your seat, you're then going to have to go ahead and adjust your steering wheel, and it's never going to be quite where you left it. If you're a solo driver, never going to be an issue, but if you do a lot of swapping between people, something that might get a little bit annoying. But because of how comfortable these are, that's a gripe that would disappear quickly, especially since in this model we have heated and ventilated seating. So this is something that I'd be able to sit in for a very long time. If there's something else in this price point that I need to go sit in, let me know down in the comment section below. Obviously the Integra is going to be one of them, but I love a good seat, so let me know if I'm missing something. In the meantime, it's time for me to go sit in the back. Out back, things aren't nearly as comfortable as they were up front, but that was to be expected. Now, as far as how I fit, the good news is I have plenty of legroom, and this is set with me as the driver. So probably 3 or 4 inches of legroom. The only issue here is that this floor is relatively high and I don't have anywhere to stretch out. So I don't have hardly any support here under my legs. Actually, this feels much more like it does in a lot of EVs that run into that issue, but obviously this one isn't an EV, it's not even a hybrid. As far as the seats themselves though, relatively comfortable. There aren't any adjustments, so I can't go ahead and tilt this forward or backward, but its set position is actually rather reclined. So I'm leaning forward to tell you more about it because of just how far this headrest wants to put you back. The downside is that my head is touching just ever so gently against the ceiling there. If I lean forward, I'm okay here. If I lean way forward, well, I run into the hump here that's part of that moonroof mechanism. So if you're taller, it gets a little bit tight. Again, I'm 6 feet tall. I have quite a long torso, even for my height. So most people honestly shouldn't have an issue, but for myself, just a little bit constrained. Let me go ahead and slide on over. This is a 5-seater. So if you are on the other outboard seat, I'll show you just a little bit better there. That space, I can't go all the way back because I run into the roof, but if I lean a little bit forward, that's where I run into some tightness there. We do have 2 lights, not out on the side here in the center. If I have this seat all the way back in its tracks, which I do, you can see I still have just about an inch or 2 of space. I have room for my feet under that seat, so even if you are taller, you should be able to find a relatively comfortable position. There are vents back here, thank goodness. No controls, just 2-zone climate, not 3, and 2 USB-C ports. We also have the ability to fold down this center armrest, 2 cup holders there. And I actually appreciate that it's also the same red material. This is a spot where maybe they could have saved a few dollars and didn't. But if you are going to be that person in the middle seat, there are going to be a couple downsides. The first is that you're going to have to go ahead and reach into the ceiling because our seat belt is located up there. It also is going to be significantly tighter. And while there's a little bit of bolstering for the outboard seats, that's actually going to work against you if you're that person in the middle. And I'll go ahead and slide in the middle. Obviously, you're going to run into a little bit of a hump there in the center, which means you're then going to go ahead and intrude in somebody else's space. I guess what I'm saying is much more of a 4-seater than it is a 5-seater, but 5 seats in a pinch. Just don't put that tallest person here in the 5th seat because they're just going to have nowhere to go. But if there are other passengers you're carrying around, especially the very small variety who require a car seat, there is a lot of room here. So forward and rear facing car seats shouldn't have any issue. It's nice and easy to access those latch points. We have them here on the outboard seats. No additional spot there for the middle, but they're not tucked behind any sort of cover. They're just indented, and so nice and easy to get to without worrying about scratching up the seating material, which you can run into in some other vehicles. Every ADX comes standard with a power hatch with the walkaway close. The only thing it doesn't have on the special feature set for hatches is going to be the lock and close, but that's one I can live without. Now at 6 feet tall, you are going to watch your head a little bit because it doesn't go quite as tall as maybe I'd like, but it's also not sticking out too wide. So I don't think it's going to be much of an issue for many. But because of the shape of that rear hatch glass, this space is a little bit limited. Not non-existent, we still have 24.4 cubic feet of storage capacity, but you'll notice it's not particularly tall. And actually, if I go ahead and lower the cargo cover, which is a hard cargo cover, which has a nice premium feel to it, you can see that we have a relatively tall shelf. If I take my bag here, tilt it on its side, I've still got room, so something taller could go ahead and fit, and you can squeeze quite a bit in here. Unfortunately, I don't have our 24-inch luggage test here, but these are all carry-on items, and they should fit, well, pretty well in here. I imagine I can get probably 4 for sure, maybe 5 of those in here at the moment. The problem is if I wanted more space, I have to take this out. Now, it is a nice slide into place setup, so it's easy to get in and out of. It will sort of fold in half. It doesn't necessarily want to, but the problem is there's nowhere to put it when you're done with it. So I guess for the moment, I'll put it right over here. And once this is out, you can see, I'll go ahead and remove the rest of my luggage here. We have a fair amount of room, but we're not going to have a lot of space underneath. Actually, if we lift this up, there are going to be 3 compartments down here, which is great because I can do emergency snacks, emergency blanket, although flares are going to have a hard time fitting in there. The flares can go ahead and fit in this longer section though. Maybe that'd be a good spot for an umbrella. And we have the tools that we need for a spare tire because, I'll spare you for a moment, this is very, very loud, but under here, we do have a spare tire. It is a temporary one, but not the most donut-y of donuts, just obviously not quite full size. And if you want to fold these seats down, you can do so fairly easily from the rear. It's not a super long reach. Go ahead and click that forward, and then we have over 50 cubic feet of storage capacity, and these fold pretty much flat. So if you have a lot of stuff in here, if you're going from regular grocery shopping to Costco run, you should be able to do that pretty easily. There isn't a whole lot else happening back here. We've got some lighting there for the rear. There's a 12-volt power outlet located just over here. And I think the standout feature is actually going to be this subwoofer, but we'll talk about more of that when we get out on the road. Time to hop inside and take a look around, and for anyone who thinks I moved from an ADX to an Integra, I can 100% understand where you're coming from because this is pretty much an exact copy-paste. On the top there, we're getting sort of a soft rubbery material, then we move to that stitched leather, then that sort of suede or felt insert, sort of an interesting material there, before we get to the shiny black plastic. Then down below that, it's not more of the insert, it's actually just a different plastic in a different color that blends all really well together. So while there is sort of a lot of components coming together at one, it blends really nicely. And just below that, one of my true highlights of this entire experience has been that Bang & Olufsen system. We have speakers down here in the center of the door, lower on the door panel, that one not going to be labeled, but it doesn't need to be. You'll see it a little bit less. And then up here in the A-pillar, you'll notice another speaker grill, obviously highlighting some of those tweeters. Back to the door though for just a moment because we have a little bit more storage, but if you have a very tall water bottle, not something you just picked up at the grocery store, you are gonna have a hard time fitting it in there. Maybe a soda can, obviously unopened, but that would be a better fit. And when it comes to a tight fit, that's kind of the name of the game here because there is not a whole lot of space. Now that bin style glove compartment will fit gloves and some knickknacks, but if you're trying to put a tablet computer in there, you're gonna have a hard time unless it's particularly small, maybe an iPad mini or something of that sort. This is assuredly plastic, but has a very nice look to it. That red leather material as well as that stitch element, and then moving on to black, but in a textured layer design that I do really appreciate. Instead of leaning over to that grill for the ventilation, I'll go ahead and look at this one because they all have the same sort of design. The silver accent around and then sort of this grid pattern. If you want to adjust it, you just move it up and down, left and right, and everything will go ahead and adjust for you. That's going to be a little bit of a pain to clean if you are one who wants to keep things very neat and tidy within your vehicle. For myself, probably not too big of an issue. Now, before I get too far ahead, let's take a look at this center screen. Now, this screen is going to be a 9-inch unit. It's what comes standard in every single ADX, so not something you're going to have to upgrade. However, on the ADX A-Spec with Advanced package, this does come with Google built in. But for myself, I'm just using my Android Auto. It'll also do wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay as standard. At 9 inches, it's not an enormous screen, but it's plenty, and it does have more physical buttons than you find on a lot of other models. Your home button, back button, obviously your volume is the dial there. Forward, track, and back, not the easiest to get to, but you do have redundant controls there on the steering wheel. That's probably what I would use. And then this is a quick look at what the standard software looks like. And pardon my parking job, but before I get too far out, I'll go ahead and show you our different camera views because there are quite a few different ways you can look at this, including a top-down view, which is generally speaking one of the easiest and most functional for me to use. You can go ahead and swipe through them as much or as little, sort of, as you want. Down from the infotainment screen, past the grills, are going to be our next button bank. This one is going to be laid out in, a 3 main dial situation. We've got our climate control left, climate control right, and our fan speeds. Now off to the left, you have controls for the different drive settings, so you can change the dynamics of the vehicle, turn on and off your auto stop start, hill descent control, the electronic parking brake, and the brake hold. I'll show you there are your individual drive mode settings, and there are a few animations that go along with it. So first of all, we start in sport, normal, comfort, and snow. You can see not just there on the driver display, but also on that infotainment screen. Now back down behind the gear selector is going to be another cup holder. This is going to be a significantly deeper one, so if you have tiny cups, you might actually have difficulty getting in and out of those, but if you have a water bottle, it's a good space for it. I had mine with me. As you can see, it's a little bit wet, and it's a very tall water bottle, but it fits in here without protruding too much higher, especially not higher than that gear selector, and that's just because of how this center console is shaped. And then we move to the armrest. It's going to go ahead and lift up back. There's a decent amount of space in here, no extra power available, but certainly enough room for some Kleenex, maybe some napkin. If you didn't fit your gloves in that glove box, this would be a good place for it. And the center armrest itself is also that red leather and nice and comfortable. We'll get to that steering wheel, but tucked just behind it is going to be your display screen. Now, this is actually larger than infotainment screen, which is a little bit unusual. In this case, it's a 10.2-inch digital display. And as you can see here, there are a couple different ways you can configure this, but I have it set to a pretty traditional layout. On the left side, your tachometer, on the right side, your miles per hour, obviously listed there in the center. And then on the left side right now, I have it Android Auto set, so it tells you what I'm listening to. It'll also do your turn-by-turn directions here. And then to the far left and the far right are going to be your temperature gauge and your fuel gauge. Back to the steering wheel, it's a nice, thick, comfortable, sporty design, one I've definitely enjoyed driving with. It's got good thumb grips here near your 10 and 2. On the left side are controls for your volume, your voice commands, your track forward and backward. Tucked behind there is going to be both a paddle shifter, your turn signal stalk, and the light controls. Over here on the right-hand side is going to be controls for your cruise control, which is going to be adaptive with the lane keeping assist. We do have that here on the A-Spec with Advance, your upshift paddle, and then controls for your wipers. At the bottom of the steering wheel, if so equipped, you'll find that heated steering wheel button, as well as the A-Spec badge and some red stitching on the inside of the black leather wrapped steering wheel. Just overhead, we've got our sun visors, and both driver and passenger have a lit vanity mirror, and they will also slide out, so pretty good sun coverage there. Moving off to the middle, we have just enough room for some sunglasses. Love having a dedicated storage spot there. And then controls for our moonroof, which we'll get to in just a second, as well as lighting, your emergency SOS, and then the HomeLink system built in for your garage door. That rear view mirror is just a standard mirror, no camera-based system, but this is going to be your opening moonroof as well as a power slide. So if you want that shade, you don't have to reach back to do it. It is exceptionally large, but since it does open, there's going to be a split here in the middle, and you can go ahead and obviously tilt that or open it all the way up. All right, time to get out on the road, and what is it we're looking at? Well, if I punch it, even in sport mode, not a rocket ship. 0 to 60, we're not quite there yet. Took just about 9.4 seconds. And that is not what I would consider fast. And I didn't really expect it to be. We'll go ahead and kick out of sport mode and let this be really where it wants to be more often than not, which is kind of just cruising. But what I will say is as poor as that 0 to 60 performance is, and honestly, not very good, and I tried it a couple times, and I made sure to have the engine running and do some revs ahead of time, but it's just not a launch car. What it is, though, is pretty good at keeping going. That's just enough power with this power to weight ratio, considering we're under 4,000 pounds, to be what I would consider competent, but again, not incredibly exciting. It doesn't mean this car isn't fun, though. Although, before we talk about fun, let's talk about what happens if you need to stop in a hurry, because the good news is the braking performance is much better than the 0 to 60 performance. This stopped from 60 down to 0 in 108 feet. But that goes back to some of that weight, because this is not what I would call a lightweight, but by today's numbers, considering it's all-wheel drive and it is as big as it is, just under 4,000 pounds, somewhere around 37 or so, is really manageable. And the tires here, the 235 width that we get with the 19-inch wheels that we get with the A-Spec, they do a really good job. But let's talk about the fun factor, because this is sort of a ha-ha fun and not a woohoo fun. If you want to get going while you're already going, I think there's plenty here, especially if you put it in sport mode. If you want to start playing with those paddle shifters, by all means. I honestly tried them and then forgot about them. It's just not the way this vehicle wants to be engaged. But if you find that backcountry road, if you have that turn you like to take it home, this will handle it just fine. I have to say probably about a B+ in the overall handling score, but a lot of that really just comes down to being lightweight and feeling pretty nimble. The suspension is not overly tight, and the steering is rather responsive, but it's all electrically controlled. I don't get a lot of feedback through that wheel, and at no point did I say, yes, I should 100% try and take those turns faster. It just didn't feel like the right place or time, and really it didn't feel like the right kind of car. If you're looking for a plush ride in your luxury car experience, I wouldn't go towards the entry-level model and expect to get that, and this is definitely going to be that case. But on small imperfections, it handled them very nicely. On bigger ones, that's where you can start to feel that this is the less expensive model, and there's nothing particularly tuned to make sure you don't feel that extra. You don't feel it terribly, but it's not dialed in to make sure that you're never getting jostled around. And if it was, it wouldn't be as fun to drive as it is. It just feels lively, but lively has sort of a connotation to it, and that just means that, well, you kind of get what's coming to you as it comes to you, instead of the vehicle predicting or reacting. It's just there. But what that means for me is that it gets probably an equal B+ on the ride score, because most of the stuff you'll run into it's going to handle with ease. It's just when you get into some trickier bits that things are going to feel a little less comfortable. What I really appreciate, though, is at no point does this feel wallowy. You can get a very top-heavy crossover these days that just doesn't feel like it wants to move, but this has fun. Honestly, it's almost like Miata fun, and bear with me for just a moment. I don't mean this is as fun as a Miata. I mean an MX-5 likes to go into a corner, and part of the fun is that it tilts along with that corner. It's not flat to the surface, it's not super tight suspension, it's just sort of a goofiness about that. And that characteristic carries through here in the ADX. Not the same as an MX-5, but in a similar way. Of the cars at home I've had to drive this week, this is the one that I keep grabbing the keys for more often than not, and honestly that's as much as I need to know. Not that I haven't had some other nice cars in the driveway, but This just speaks to me, and there is sort of a youthfulness about that. Though, here's one of the downsides. Because this is an entry level in a luxury car brand that isn't known from the beginning to be exceptionally luxurious, right? This is not a Mercedes, this is not a BMW, it's not an Audi, and it's not even a Lexus. It leans on the sportier side of things. But I think to help keep the price tag down and what this is based off of, the downside has been how much road noise is getting into the cabin. And this is a very quiet road, which I do on purpose so you can hear me talk. But what I can tell you is as soon as you get on a rougher road and start going faster, this can quickly turn into not a particularly pleasant place to be. At 50 miles an hour, I was reading 65 decibels, and it fluctuated a lot more than a lot of other vehicles. You know, if I had something coming up or I hit a rumble strip or some of those other things that bring noise into the cabin, this just didn't do as good of a job as keeping it out. But here's the good news. There is a solution, and the answer is your stereo. Because for the price tag, this has one of the best stereos I've been in. And yes, we could start picking apart things and saying that one's better and this one's technically more accurate or reproduces the sound in a more genuine way. But this is a lot of fun, and that is the recurring theme here, is that this car is fun. It's got a red interior, which is fun. The seats are fantastic, and they make you feel like you're driving a sports car. That's fun. And what's nice is I can listen to whatever I wanted. There are some cars that don't really have the range to make certain music sound particularly good. This one does. That subwoofer back there is working. If this is all feeling maybe a little bit too upbeat for an entry-level vehicle, or at least entry in its segment, bear with me, there is a bit of a downside, and that's going to be the fuel economy. It's not that this is a bad engine and transmission pairing. As I mentioned, when you're revving it up, it doesn't sound amazing, but I don't think this is the car you want to rev up all the time. So for me, not a big issue. But I would like to see better fuel economy considering we don't have over-the-moon power numbers, and this one is a little bit middling. On my 50-mile loop, which includes some low-speed city driving, highway driving at 70, up and down a hill, and back to my house, I got 30 miles per gallon, which is on the high end for what should be expected for this vehicle. But there are other cars in this category, this sort of strange category that it inhabits, that can do better. It's not that I hate the powertrain as it is, I just wish if I didn't get more power out of it, I got more fuel economy out of it. But there is an answer, it's just not one that I think Acura is taking on at this moment. The ADX is so interesting and maybe even compelling because of its value proposition. And what seems completely unheard of is from 2025 into 2026, the base price stays exactly the same. Not adjusted for inflation, not worried about tariffs, the exact same. So the pricing you see here is for 2025, and I expect if the top end isn't also the exact same, it'll be very, very close. Everything else listed is for 2026. But within this luxury segment, this entry-level luxury segment, there is still quite a bit of division, and especially when it comes down to the pricing, but not for no reason. You clearly seem to have sort of an entry, a mid, and a higher end tier, and honestly, let's start at the higher end tier, because even though the Audi Q3 right now at the time of filming only has one specific trim level, it still comes in quite a bit more expensive, and the X1 follows suit. Obviously tops out more, but there are multiple ways to order it. Those start where the ADX really begins, but they're not the same kind of vehicle, not to my mind, because you're getting a mix of things like performance and luxury touches and honestly just an overall experience. You really do get what you pay for here, and I don't think it's a bad value, but it's not going to be a direct head-to-head competitor, especially if you're looking off of paper. If you go drive them, you will notice the difference. So for those, we're going to toss them aside. That middle tier, at least on this chart, is made up exclusively of something like that Volvo XC40, which I think is a fantastic little vehicle. But it is still going to be a step above what we find in some of the entry-level models, which I'm calling right now things like the ADX and something like the UX. It might be worth the extra money, so don't rule it out, especially if this is well within your budget. But again, head-to-head, I'm going to keep things a little bit simpler. What most folks I think are going to look towards as a direct competitor are going to be, let's say, across the aisle, so to speak, in the automotive world, and it's going to be the Lexus competitor in that UX. But even though those fall into the same entry-level pricing categories, they are ended up being, well, pretty different vehicles. Very similar in size, and as far as overall design, I leave that one up to you. I think the UX is getting a little bit old in its looks, but not bad. I just think I'm more drawn to something like the ADX. It just feels a little racier. I actually think the best way to sum this up is that the UX is great on paper, but how does it carry over into the real world? And trust me, on paper, the reason these two are not going to be directly cross-shopped, I don't think a whole lot, is because the UX is going to absolutely crush the ADX when it comes to things like efficiency. You can get a front-wheel drive or an all-wheel drive, and you can get nearly 40 miles per gallon. The ADX, nowhere near it. And you also get more power out of the UX, but is it a more interesting drive? To me, the answer is going to be no, and it doesn't have the same sort of personality that we find over in the Acura. I love efficiency, but if I was shopping in this category, even though the UX is maybe a little bit more clinical about things, I think I'd have to go for the excitement. And it's relative, but the ADX is certainly more exciting than you'll find over in the Lexus. So with that in mind, let's move on to what I think is a more interesting comparison, or sort of a more apples to apples than I would have thought it is, and that's going to be in the Mini Countryman. This is definitely the biggest Mini, but it carries a lot of the same sort of Mini attitude with it, which means it is interesting. And that's, again, one of the things I like about the ADX is it has some sort of personality to it. You can do a lot of customization when it comes to the Countryman, but it is still going to fall short in overall size. It's going to be a little bit taller, so if you have very tall torso people, then consider that. But it ends up being a little bit smaller, which is better for parking in the city, but maybe not as enjoyable for your overall drive. I will say I find the interior of the Mini more interesting than over in Acura, but conventional is conventional for a reason. A lot of people tend to float that direction. So I don't know if Mini's going to take a whole lot of folks out of the ADX market. I just think they're worth doing back-to-back test drives. And as you equip these things, they end up being pretty similarly priced. But at the end of it, I think Acura has very quietly hit this one out of the park. The ADX is a great vehicle to drive, and it has things that I think entry-level luxury shoppers are going to be looking for, and maybe has passed over some of the things that make it unattainable for others. Admittedly, it is going to be pretty loud on a road trip, but crank the tunes and don't worry a whole lot about it. I think some of the entry-level folks in the luxury segment are going to be some of the younger folks, so things like overall road noise aren't going to be as bothersome as maybe those who have been in the luxury market for quite a while. It's not the most popular luxury segment out there, and it certainly falls short of things like BMW, Audi, Mercedes when it comes to fit, finish, overall materials, the things that make it feel plush. This doesn't feel plush, but it feels sporty and interesting. But there are a few things missing that I would absolutely love to see carried over that I do think would carry into the sporty. Look at the rest of the Honda lineup that uses the term sport on their trim levels. Those sports are exclusively in hybrids in most of the cases. So go ahead and put that hybrid system right here in the ADX. I appreciate that we don't have the same carryover from the HRV when it comes to the engine and the power, but we are still short of something like the UX, and we are well short of it when it comes to things like fuel economy. If they did go that direction and put that package together, the only thing I'd be a little bit worried about is putting a Type S badge on it. Obviously, we see that in something like the Integra, which is way more interesting to drive, but I worry that would actually dilute that Type S model and maybe need to go a different direction. But there's no doubt that the ADX, while only having been on sale for a little while now, has been relatively popular. I expect that'll continue to grow, and at the end of the day, I love seeing more interesting vehicles on the road, especially if they have a luxury badge on them. They should have, I don't know, some sort of luxury excitement. I don't need any more bland, and I don't think you do either. And if you want more power and efficiency, let us know. We'll let Acura know. That way, hopefully, we can talk about a hybrid ADX in the next couple years. Probably not something we would see for 27, but if it came around for 28, I think that would be an absolute hit. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any other thoughts, questions, comments, or concerns, you can leave those for us. Email us at hey@autobuyersguide.com. If you want to hear more about the vehicles we've just driven or things that are coming up, you can tune into our podcast at the Auto Buyer's Guide podcast here on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite pods. Until next time, I'll see you down the road.